Over the past few updates, the usefulness of crowd control towers has significantly increased in TDS. So this raises the question, who is actually the best crowd control tower in Roblox TDS? In this video, I decided to try 3 of the best towers for crowd control. Those towers are the Mortar, the Trapper with landmines, and the Harvester. Now obviously there are other crowd control towers too. Some recent combos include the Firework Technician and the Shotgunner, but I am not including them because they are also good in single target scenarios and are not completely crowd control towers. So let's get started in the video. Now the most obvious way of comparing these 3 towers was to bring all of them in a single match and see who deals the most damage. So in this match, 2 of my mortars did over 100k damage, the harvesters also did some pretty good damage, and some of the farms did 20k, some of the trappers also dealt over 50k damage. However, the problem with this test was that all the crowd controls could not work at their full potential. So I decided to try each of these towers separately in different matches and use them to their full potential. So the first tower is Mortar. This is currently the most popular crowd control tower in TDS. When maxed, it has an amazing explosion radius and also cluster bombs. It has a long range and flying detection from the level 0, which makes it a reliable crowd control DPS. To use Mortar to its full potential, I decided to use Cryomancer and all kinds of supports with it. Now obviously Cryomancer was a limited time event tower and can't be obtained anymore. If you have it, then you can use it, or you can use it without Cryomancer. Level 4 and 5 Mortar has cluster bombs. These bombs come out when the mortar hits an enemy and can deal really good AoE damage. However, in most cases, all the cluster bombs will never hit a single enemy, but it's still a reliable option. The best thing about Mortar is its long range and flying detection along with lead penetration at early levels. This makes it a reliable option for early game too. Upgrades are pretty cost efficient. A mortar can only be placed on cliffs, which can be an advantage or a disadvantage because it takes up cliff places which are very limited and can be used with rangers or gatling. And also in certain maps, cliff placements are not good enough. However, in maps where there are many cliff slots, then using mortar is a good option. The only weakness of mortar is that it lacks hidden detection even at high levels. However, hidden enemies can get indirectly hit by the mortar if the mortar targets a nearby enemy. A max level mortar costs over 40k, provides a single target DPS of about 50 for normal damage. Each cluster bomb adds about 16 DPS. With the help of Cryomancer, the mortar can easily hit multiple enemies as they can be grouped together. It will deal instant damage. In hardcore mode, mortar can be used to clear lead balloons as they have both lead and flying detection. The mortar can also be fully buffed by Commander, DJ and Mercenary base, which can be very useful. It has stun immunity. Overall, the mortar is a very solid crowd control tower. However, its weakness is that it may not be as cost efficient as the Trapper or as reliable as Harvester in terms of raw damage output against large hordes. Despite some of these weaknesses, the mortar still remains a reliable crowd control DPS in every game mode. So let's move on to the next crowd control tower, which is Trapper. Just like the mortar, it also works well with the Cryomancer. The Trapper has 3 types of traps: spike traps, landmines and bear traps. As we are testing for crowd control potential, so we'll be only considering the landmines because both the spikes and bear traps are single target. Trapper has a cheap placement cost and can be used for early game. It is pretty effective in early game because of its good cost efficiency, and even in late game it remains a viable option as a decent crowd control and cost-efficient tower. It doesn't have direct wind detection, but as the traps are placed on the path, so hidden enemies can walk on it and get damaged. So it makes up for the absence of wind detection like that. However, unlike the mortar, trapper has no flying detection. The trapper also has over 80 DPS, which is pretty high for a crowd control tower. The cost of maxing a trapper from level 0 to 5 is actually less than upgrading mortar from level 4 to 5. Both the mortar and the trapper deal explosion damage, which has a disadvantage. If enemies are near the core of the explosion, then they will take full damage. However, if they are little away from the core, then they will take reduced damage even if they are in the explosion radius. This means both mortar and trapper are effective against stacked hordes of enemies. But if the enemies are not very stacked together, then they will deal reduced damage. That's why Cryomancer can be paired with mortar and trapper. The explosion from landmines also provides burn to enemies. However, it does not melt defense unlike the Pyromancer. The best thing about trapper is that it keeps on placing traps even when there are no enemies in its range, which means when a wave is about to start, then none of your towers are shooting or doing anything, and the trapper is continuously placing traps. So when the wave starts, then enemies will start getting damaged by trapper. This can allow the trapper to build up insane amounts of damage, making it extremely reliable if you don't need flying detection but want to focus on cost efficiency and crowd control. Oh, by the way, the trapper is also fully buffed by support, just like the mortar, and is not stun immune. So now let's talk about the harvester, our last crowd control tower which we are considering in this video. Most of harvester's crowd control abilities come from his ability, Thorns. You can use this ability anywhere on the path. It will place some thorns on it, and any enemy which walks on it will get slowed down and will be taking continuous damage. The DPS and slowdown offered by the thorns depend on the level of the harvester. However, the most powerful thing about harvester is that whenever you use the thorns ability, then each farm which is placed near the path which is in harvester's range will also produce an extra thorn of the same level. So if you place 8 farms in the harvester range near the path, then you can get 8 thorns in total, which can build up insane amounts of damage. Or you can also spread away your farms so that the thorns can cover the entire map. The harvester also deals pierce damage just like the shotgunner and can damage multiple enemies. Normal attacks can also target hidden enemies and flying enemies. However, the thorns can only damage normal ground enemies and hidden enemies. The harvester's upgrade can be quite expensive at early levels and are not very efficient, so it is always better to use it for mid or late game, as the max level thorns are extremely reliable both for stalling enemies and dealing with crowds. Both harvesters, normal attacks and thorns have around 60 DPS. Normal DPS can be buffed by supports, however the thorns DPS cannot be buffed. This means supports are not very useful with the harvester. If you are using harvester, then make sure that your team has at least a few farms placed near the path, or else there will be a massive DPS loss, and harvester without farm is not worth it. At higher levels, you can use 2 or more harvesters to chain the thorns so that the map will be covered with thorns all the time, and enemies will always be slowed down and will be taking damage. Remember that harvester's ability can make farms spawn thorns, so always place the farm in the range of harvesters near the path. And also the damage dealt in that way will be shown as damage dealt by farm and not by harvester's personal damage. The thorns can cover a significant portion of the map,
and so harvester should always be used against large hordes of enemies. Against smaller stacked groups, mortar and trapper will perform better. The harvester itself has quite decent range and can be paired with DJ's range buff to cover as many farms as possible. So let's answer the question, who is actually the best crowd control tower in TDS? After considering the difficulty and all the current game modes in TDS, I would say that Mortar is actually the most useful option right now. It also has flying detection and is reliable for such crowd control. It can work in every game mode even if you don't win farms and use cowboy or no economy towers instead. For slowdown, harvester can be a good option if you don't have any other stalling towers. Trapper is a very cost efficient tower and can be used for early game. Therefore, Mortar is probably the best crowd control tower at this point and also the most versatile option, so you should probably use the Mortar. That's it for today's video. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. See you guys in the next video.